Episode 32 of the Photon Podcast. How do you chase and work DX? We're going to learn all about it coming up.
AmateurRadio15.com presents Photon, the other ham radio podcast, sponsored by Main Trading Company. Find them online at mtcradio.com. Now, here's your host, Cale Nelson, K4CDN.
That's right. Welcome into episode 32. I am your host. My name's Cale. My call is Kilo 4 Charlie Delta November. I'm a general class amateur operator here in the upstate of South Carolina. This is episode 32 of the Photon Podcast. If this is your very first time, welcome in, and we hope that you stick around. Listen to a couple of more shows. Give us a chance. Maybe we'll become your favorite podcast. That's what we're shooting for, and we're having a good time doing it. We're doing it a little bit over a year, and this podcast, the Photon Podcast, is aimed directly at the new guy just getting into the hobby. Maybe you're out there teetering, don't really know if you want to become an amateur radio operator or not, and we're trying to provide you information to help you make an informed decision whether or not you would like to jump into the hobby. It's not just for those guys, though. We have folks who listen from across the spectrum of amateur radio operators from around the world, and we appreciate you coming back with us every single time. Got a great show coming up. We're going to talk about DX here in just a couple of minutes, but first, let me remind you of my friends, Christy, Richard, Tammy, and Danielle down there at Main Trading Company, mtcradio.com. Matter of fact, as I'm recording this program today, releasing it, I am anticipating I finally got my money together, and I was able to purchase a new Kenwood TMV71A dual band mobile transceiver. I'm really excited about that. And of course, where did I order it? It and the new Comet antenna came from my friends down at mtcradio.com. I tell you that to tell you this. If you need any gear, whether it's brand new, it's used, repacked, antennas, wire, connectors, whatever you're looking for, if your amateur radio gear needs, give them a call. Check them out online, mtcradio.com. I guarantee you'll find what you're looking for. So in just a couple of seconds, we're going to get to the interview with our guest today, Bruce Jewett, Whiskey 1 Golf, Quebec. Bruce is a contester DX chaser extraordinaire from southern New Hampshire. Now, that's still really far north of me, and he says he has about 6 months of winter a year compared to what we're suffering through down here in South Carolina. But either way, it's a great show, and I got to give a shout-out to my buddy George. George, thank you so much for helping get this together. You guys know George. George has been on the show many times. He's going to be on here today, as well as some upcoming shows that we've got lined up as we continue to learn about this vast hobby, amateur radio. But today we're going to talk about DX, and we'll be up with Bruce in just a sec. This portion of the Photon Podcast is brought to you by ICOM America's IC718 HF transceiver. With its easy-to-read display, push-button control panel, and factory DSP, the 718 is the perfect HF starter rig for the new ham or even an experienced operator who is looking to add a solid, no-nonsense performer to their shack. Visit mtcradio.com to order your ICOM IC718 today. Okay, we do have Bruce with us. His call is Whiskey 1GQ. I like that. Golf, Quebec. Bruce, welcome to the Photon Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Bruce is a friend of George, and we all know George from the show in the past, and even though he continues to tell me how to say his last name, I'm not going to try it again. But George, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being with us as well.
Hey, Kale, my pleasure.
George and Bruce have known each other for quite a while, and really want to share with you. George thought this would be a great topic. And it's funny, George, because we have been asked about this time and time again, and I'm glad we finally got someone we could talk to regarding what is DX. I mean, we talk about it here on the show. We try to talk to guys that are new, that are coming into the show and coming into the hobby. You want to make sure that they're getting an understanding, but sometimes we still get crazy with those three-letter, or in this case, two-letter acronyms, and appreciate you putting this together. And really look forward to discussing what is DX and how do I do it. Thank you, George.
You bet.
All right. So, Bruce, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been in amateur radio, and what do you do? We know your call is Whiskey 1GQ. We don't know if you've ever been on the cover of the magazine or not, but we can appreciate your 1x2 call for sure.
Well, thank you, Cal. No, I haven't been on the cover of GQ magazine, although I probably could be. How about that?
There you go.
So, no, I'm from Southern California, born and raised in Palos Verdes. In fact, W6AM, the legendary Don Wallace Rhombic station, it's an old press wireless broadcast station during the World War II era, was literally up the street from me. So when I was a child, around 13 years old, several of us would ride our bicycles around Palos Verdes, and lo and behold, a couple old gray-haired guys at the W6AM station invited us in. Of course, today you'd probably run the other direction because you're fearful of these kind of folks inviting you anywhere. But my buddy and I went inside to the station or the shack. It was enormous. It's worth Googling. He had rhombics in all parts of the world. It was on about 3.5 acres of land just for the antenna farm alone. He didn't live there. He lived in Long Beach, but this was a shack. And in today's dollars, it was probably $100 million worth of real estate. But back then, he bought it for a song. But the bottom line is, as a child, either you went into that ham radio shack, that was 1969 to be exact, and either you caught the bug, which I did, or you ran out the back door and said, boy, that was some strange stuff. But that was the long and short of a ham radio career that spans all the way today, and I'm extremely active. But it all started with kind of a chance encounter with what I consider one of the biggest stations on planet Earth back in the 60s and the 50s.
That's definitely a way to get your appetite whet, for sure, to come into something like that.
Well, like I said, either you get hooked or you get scared, and I certainly got the bug all the way into a license in the 70s and started what I would consider a very modest ham radio station to where I've got a pretty good installation today.
Well, tell us a little bit about that, because a lot of guys they really don't know where to go with their gear, and some guys come in thinking, okay, well, I've seen pictures of this guy's shack and it's massive, and that's what I have to aspire to become an operator. Some people go that direction, some people go minimalist, but tell us a little bit about what you work on there in your shack.
Well, in today's shack, it's quite substantial. I'm a serious contester back here in W1 land. I live up in southern New Hampshire, right on the border of Massachusetts and New Hampshire. And we've got an acre of land, we've got 4 big towers and a substantial station. And I've been in the contesting world for quite some time. But back to your original question, which is where to begin and how to begin. Frankly, sunspot cycle plays a big role. The fortunate part for me is when I caught the bug in 1970. The 10 meters in the sunspot cycle was 10 meters was very active, and of course because of the sunspot cycle being at its peak, in a very modest station. I mean, I had a wire at the back door and what I consider just an awful receiver and transmitter in today's standards, and was able to work DX. And frankly, with a very modest radio, getting back to W6AM, every time he was on, of course, that radio would just fry. I mean, the front end of that receiver was just overloaded with the station. But when he's not on, a very modest station, I was able to work several countries, and of course that led to a long career in ham radio. Fantastic.
Now, your interest, I'm going to guess here, you really enjoy contesting, working overseas, working DX. Is that where you find yourself the love of the hobby right there? And is it digital modes or is it voice? Which one do you enjoy the most?
Oh, I'm a CW guy. In fact, I started. It was pretty much you had to learn CW. Of course, your novice test back then was a requirement into an advanced and extra. And I'm still a very active CW operator. But no, I think the real joy, contesting is an interesting pivot off of DXing. That's this massive DXing in my book. When you're working 48 hours in CQ Worldwide or ARRL, it is just it's all about working as many stations in as many parts of the world as you possibly can. But it all goes back to DXing. The fundamental is just that joy of working a distant land. think I was talking to George about this 3 or 4 weeks ago. I can still sit in the shack at 3 in the morning with my eyes closed and get that same feeling that I had when I was 13 years old about just working some foreign land, whether it be Japan or even some at that time, which is pretty hard for me to work from Southern California into South Africa or something of that nature. But I still have that feeling today after all these years, and I've been a ham for decades, and that joy and that feeling still with me to this moment.
That's hard to explain to people like my wife, who has. Why would you want to go sit in your barn and talk to somebody when you have a family of beautiful people here in the house that would like to speak to you? And it's just the magic of radio. I don't have any other explanation for you, sweetheart. It's just the magic of radio, and it's us geeks embrace it, and we don't know why you can't.
Right. Yeah, well, the other thing too, being from Southern California, where you just simply can't put up a couple of towers, and I moved to New Hampshire and put up 4 big ones, all 130 feet, big stacked Yagis and all that kind of stuff. And my wife looks out the back door and wonders what the heck happened here. But it's part of the magic of the hobby. It just continues to grow.
Right. Now, like I said just a few minutes ago, a lot of times we get caught up in the hobby, and in any hobby that we have, we get caught up with these acronyms that make us. We can speak the language. It's easy for us. We know what we're talking about. But Delta X-Ray, DX, is what we're going to talk about this episode, this time through. And we've got Bruce with us. His call is Whiskey 1 Golf Quebec. And we're talking DX. DX is contacting a foreign station, hearing a foreign station, connecting with a foreign station, making that distant connection. Is that a good, solid definition for the term DX?
Absolutely. Okay. Spot on.
All right. Tell me a little bit about making DX contacts. Right now, I don't get a lot of time to operate. My furthest contact is Japan. I was on 20, and I was running the random wire, 8 feet off the ground, 100 watts. I was totally stoked that I got Japan. Couldn't believe it. And that's kind of my most rare DX that I've gotten. But tell us a little bit about what's the draw? Why is that important to us in the hobby that we want to make these foreign contacts?
Well, I think it's the challenge of it for sure. One of the things that I just continue to challenge myself with, work every country in the world, work every country in the world on all bands. The ARRL has the DXCC awards program, and I encourage your listeners to go there and take a look at what they offer. My challenge is I've worked all countries in the world except for North Korea. I've actually worked North Korea, but the QSL card doesn't count. It has to be credited. And of course, there's all the world tension. But when you look at these challenges, working DXCC, all bands, all modes, working all parts of the world in CW, whether it be 10 meters, so there's all these different types of awards. And for whatever reason, that caught my fancy. Some people don't care about awards. They just look at it as, they'll work the countries, and that's just the thrill of it by itself. But for me, I like a challenge, and I like to be able to aim for something. And one of these days I'll work North Korea, and then I can actually say that I've worked them all. But I can't say that yet.
Almost. But you have to have something to aspire to.
Well, yeah, and the other thing that's fun about DXing, and it's in fact, my children, as they were growing up, now they're through college, but you become very aware of the world. Mm-hmm. When you look at a map at midnight and you're working different parts of the world, you become very familiar with obviously the geography of it all, but also what happens politically. There's several countries over the years that I've worked that have changed. Either the regime, and so they don't count as a DXCC country, or other ones have added onto the list. Right. As it turns out, I've worked more countries than they exist in the DXCC award, because I've worked several countries over the years that are no longer accredited. Well, they're credited, but they're no longer counted as part of the DXCC. So you can actually work more countries than the ARRL DXCC allocates.
It's fantastic. Now, I've got a Kenwood TS 850. I've got a Kenwood TS 50. I know George has a garage full of rigs. He's got a KX3. Of course, everybody. Let me ask you, Bruce. Do you have a KX3?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody does. Everybody. Everyone that comes on the show has a KX3 except the host.
Well, but there's a little story around that. I was with George on a business trip. I think we're in Japan, someplace on planet Earth, and he convinced me to swipe my credit card and go buy one. And I don't.
But I have to add that was a K3 to start with. So,
that's true.
So Bruce, of course we sit there. You look at all the options for the K3, and he filled in all the check boxes. Not sure what they were, but you got to get all the things. So he got a pretty tricked out radio.
Well, there we go. We can't get, Bruce, you may not realize this, but we can't get through a show without someone talking about having a KX3, and I just had to go ahead and get that out of the way because we're going to talk about equipment and what type of equipment we use for DXing. Can it be anything HF? Can we do any gear HF to do DX work, or do we need specific gear? And can you do it on a budget? Can you do it with an unlimited budget? You can do about anything you want. But can a poor broke guy that's getting started in the hobby, he's got his general license and he really wants to try something fun, can he get in there and do that? And what sort of gear would you what would come to your mind to work the DX?
Well, the answer is yes, but you can use anything. It all depends on how hard you want to work at it. I mean, again, when I was a young child, I had a wire antenna, and I had just an awful receiver and transmitter. I bet it put out 20 watts, and you've got to work it in the sense that you have to make sure that you're optimizing the different parts of the world, what time you're going to be working it, how the sunspot cycles are reacting. Fortunately, when I became a ham operator, the sunspot cycles were at the peak, so 10 meters was very active. And I remember working, probably 20 watts into an antenna that was 5 feet off the ground, working Japan on 10 meters. Because when 10 meters is red hot, it's red hot.
Right.
Now, on the flip side of that, if you want to work 160 or 80 meters with a wire antenna on 10 watts, you might as well just go in the backyard and start screaming because there's no use, right? So it all depends on where you want, and the other thing too, and this is why I love CW so darn much, it's a very efficient mode. In fact, it's just a wonderful mode when you haven't got much power. You don't have a big antenna because, again, you're not competing against that wide bandwidth you are with SSB or other modes. It's a very elegant mode for low power. So go back to your original question. I'm a firm believer that you can use very modest equipment and just have nothing but fun with it. And I think that a lot of people use QRP as a challenge. I keep threatening George that one of these days I'll do a QRP contest, and I haven't done it yet.
Something's going to freeze over when that happens, I think.
But you go from and I've done it right from a very small station in Palos Verdes to what I have today, which is a very significant station with big stack Yagis and all that kind of stuff, and everything in between works just fine. I like to be very commanding on the bands when it comes to DXing, but I could certainly use QRP and be very patient and work it as well.
So it all really comes down again to budget and then desire to make it work.
I think that's exactly the equation. The desire. If you have that fire in your belly to work various parts of the world, and you have a small budget you want to manage too, then you got to put in the equation of patience and diligence to ensure that you got to fight when these DX, especially the rare ones. Let's use Bovet, which is going to come up here in 2016 in January. I remember when that thing was on in probably 91. I think was the last time they were operational. It's the number one sought after DX in planet Earth. It's an island down in the Antarctic. You can't get there without having helicopters and icebreakers. It's a real challenge. And I just remember that working my station here in southern New Hampshire, fighting thousands and thousands of people calling simultaneously for that one station sitting on the island in Antarctica. And you've got to be incredibly patient. You have to be smart the way that you chase that DX too. In other words, if that station is listening up and slowly moving the VFO up the bands and down the bands, you kind of got to get the behavior of the operator on the other side. And once you understand that behavior of the operator, then you could be sitting on that frequency when he's swinging that VFO up or down the bands. And you can, so you got to challenge yourself to listen very carefully before you start calling.
that we've discussed in the past about listening and how important that is. And it hit me today. It's funny that you brought that up. This is a little off topic, but it hit me today. We have 2 ears, 1 mouth. And we always hear in amateur radio to listen, and then listen again. And it's the same way. We learn a lot more when we have our mouths closed and we're listening than we do when we're flapping off at the jaws. So I think it relates to our lives as well. That hit me earlier today, and I was like, wow, that kind of works together. But yeah, listening is so important. Tell us a little bit about, just a little off kilter here. Tell us, you're talking about finding how the operator on the other end is operating. Is that something that comes with time, or you're following this guy so closely you're able to kind of track what he's doing? Explain that a little bit to us there.
Yeah, exactly. Tracking what he's doing so you can be at the right place at the right time. Again, when you're working DX, especially the rare ones like Bouvet, chances are he or she are going to be listening up the band 5 to 10, and they're going to be spreading all over the place. So if you haven't got much power and you have a modest antenna and you're running CW, you want to make sure that you're going to sit on that frequency at the exact right time. Now that's a challenge in itself, but again, you want to make sure that as that behavior, if that person is jumping around, that's one thing that you see. They'll go up 5, up 10, back down to 5, back up to 10. So they kind of go between 2 or 3 different frequencies, or they taking that VFO and kind of drifting slowly up the bands. Most of them will drift up the band, so listen 5 to 10 up, and then they'll take that VFO and go up 5 megahertz and then back down, and just kind of sweep back and forth. Because what they're doing, and I've been on the other side of this, so I clearly understand this. There's thousands of people calling them. There's no way that your ear, especially if it's CW or sideband for that fact too, but there's no way you can detect and kind of move people away so you can listen to one station. You got to kind of tune around a little bit to make sure that you can hear this person. So listen. And then the other thing too, if that person does call you back and you've got a modest station, be sure you're listening to where that the person, so you know what to do, right? I remember when I was just a very young DXer and I worked somebody, I didn't even know I worked them, and someone told me that they heard me make this contact. I didn't even know I did. So, in order to make a qualified contact, you've got to do the exchange, and you got to make sure you listened and heard that he or she actually called you.
I got you. You
got a lot of moving parts, I guess, is the real point there.
Well, you can't be lazy. I mean, you're going to be on your toes when you're working, especially in pileups, especially in rare DX. It wasn't long ago that, of course, they had a lot of people, bringing QRM on top of one of the last D expeditions. I can't remember the name of that one, but it was huge, and everyone was wanting it, and it was just a terrible mess. But I think that at least all 700,000 amateurs in the U.S. decided to get out at one time and try. And if you think about it, if it's the most rare DX on the face of the earth, anyone with an HF rig is going to be trying, or at least probably 75-80% of those people all at the same time.
Well, absolutely, and if you've got a big station with a lot of power, you can cut through the noise. But again, I look at your listeners, everything from a modest to a DX, heavy duty DX station. You want to make sure that you're carefully planning each one of those calls, because 700,000 people calling simultaneously. You might as well just go do something else, because you're never going to get through unless you're very careful.
Which kind of leads us to the next thing here, real quick before we go to a break, and we can come back if we need to, if we don't get it all. But just curious, my favorite band to operate on is 20 meters. I just love 20 meters. That may or may not be the best band to operate for DX, not D expeditions notwithstanding. Is there a better band, or are all bands fair game?
Good question. I think all bands are fair game. I certainly have a substantial antenna arrangement on 20, but again, daylight, sunspot cycle up 10 meters can be the most fun band in the world. I have to say, in fact, I remember this is not this sunspot cycle, but the last one. It was so highly charged, the ionosphere, that I could send CQ, just hit a dit, and I could hear myself go around the world and hear. It took about half a second, and I could hear myself. So when you have that much, band conditions when 10 meters is really rocking like that, that's a fun band. On the flip side, though, when the sunspot cycle's down, 10 meters can be the worst band because nothing's going to happen. So then you go the other direction, which is 160 and 80. I have to say, I think every band has its challenges. Your question is, what band's the best? It depends on sunspot cycles, depends on the time of day for sure. But also, every band has their challenges. I like 160. I've got a pretty darn good beverage and verticals and all that on 160. That has its own challenge because of the noise, the absorption, But there again, working DX on 160 from New Hampshire into Europe, that's a huge challenge. But it's a challenge that I just really get a thrill out of. Unlike 20, where I could probably roll on any day of the week and do 20 into Europe, 160 is not that way. So I like that challenge. Right. Either all ends of the band. So I like all bands, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, maybe that's why I like 20 so much, just because it's easier.
Well, yeah, it's true, but everybody else feels that too. So I like to go where people are not.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we're going to take a break real quick. We'll be back with Bruce and George. Bruce's call is Whiskey 1 Golf Quebec. We all remember George, KJ6 Victor United, and we'll get back here in just a couple of minutes and continue talking about DX and the joy therein. Back in a few. This is the Photime Podcast.
Main Trading Company, celebrating 6 years in the amateur radio business. Visit the website www.mtcradio.com and be sure and give us a call if you don't see what you're looking for. And if you happen to catch Danielle on the phone, she's our latest employee at Main Trading Company, and she just got her tech license. Congratulations to our very own Danielle Varner at Main Trading Company. Give us a call for all your ham radio needs, 903-737-0773.
This portion of the Photime Podcast is brought to you by Kenwood USA's TMV-71 dual band mobile radio. The TMV-71 is a real performer with true dual band operation, cross-band repeat, weather alert, wide receive, detachable face, and even a TNC data jack for packet and APRS. Run the rig that I run, the Kenwood TMV-71, available now from mtcradio.com, mtcradio.com. All right, we're back with Bruce and George, and we're talking DX here on this episode, this time through on the Photime Podcast. We appreciate you being with us. We've been talking, we touched just a moment on bands, and I just heard something on Skype. Oh, George has a question. George, give us your question.
Well, just a thought here, Bruce. You talked about 10, 20, 80 across the bands. And I'm curious what you think about the work bands, because when a lot of guys are looking at what kind of antenna to put up, putting a lot of bands on requires more antenna gear. And is it worth setting up your station to cover the work bands?
Well, Skype got him. Did you hear the end of that, Bruce?
Yeah, I did. It centers on the work bands. I mean, I do have antennas on the work bands. I like working them. The reason I don't spend a tremendous amount of time optimizing the station for them is, frankly, most of my efforts are centered around contesting, and you can't contest on those bands. But working DX, there's nothing better than 24 or 18. 24 has similar behavior as 10 meters, so it kind of it depends on the sunspot cycle. But 18 is just a fun band. So I do have a good size antenna on 18, and I've worked a lot of DX on those on the work bands.
With the change up of our sunspots, and we know that it's been down, although 10 does have its great days, and they're usually when I'm unable to get up here to the shack, it seems. What are you anticipating for the next couple of years regarding the sunspot activity and DX?
Well, it's going to continue to decline, but I look at the other side of that, which is 10 and certainly 15 will get challenged, but then the noise goes down, and when the noise goes down, 80, 160 become and certainly 40 for some, a little bit, but 80 and 160 become the bands. In fact, working DX on 160 at the peak of the sunspot cycle is incredibly difficult because of the noise. So it depends on how you want to lay out your challenges for DXCC if that's one of the things you want to go after. When the sunspot cycle's down, pick up 80 and 160. I think they're just wonderful challenges.
If you were a new guy, you had been licensed for 3, 6, 8, 9 months, you were general class or an extra class, and you were interested in starting to do some serious DXing, you could put up one antenna, single band, where would you go?
I'll go 20. I would definitely go 20 because it takes, it's right in the center of the excitement. Most DX will, they'll be on 20 somewhere along the line. And then the other, it certainly is affected by the sunspot cycle, but it's not like 10 where it's going to shut down for years at a time, right. Or 160 where the noise is going to be so high at the peak of the sunspot cycle you can't even work anything.
Tell us a little bit about the gray line, because I know that plays a large, it's a heavy-handed item regarding DX.
Certainly in the low bands. I again work a lot of contests, and when that gray line is coming up into Asia, when you're sitting in New Hampshire, it's really hard to work the low bands into the Asia region. In fact, at times it's just impossible. And so I follow the gray line. 160 or 80. I'll make sure that I'm listening and I'm optimized for wherever that gray line is falling into Japan or wherever it may be, and it's a fun time, and it's an unusual phenomena too, because you can hear the noise. Let's say 160, you can hear the noise. All of a sudden, it quiets down for just a brief period. Stations will come out of the noise. You can hear them, work them for as fast as you possibly can if you're into DX and 160, and then it'll go away just as fast. So that gray line following the transition between night and day is just a fun experience. I encourage your listeners to give that a try. And if you're not, if you don't have antennas for 160, listen on 80, and I think you'll just be surprised what you can hear.
And that's pretty easy to find, especially online. I mean, you can go find where the gray line is at any given time.
There's some really nice programs that you can download for free that you can certainly download and load up.
Okay. Now, speaking of downloading, DX Cluster. I hear the guys on our local 220 machines, and they're always talking, hey, I've seen this on the cluster, I've seen this on the cluster. My DX cluster is my VFO. I don't have the internet connectivity to sit here and to keep up where people are. But explain to us what the DX cluster is and how you use it regarding spotting calls and making contacts.
Yeah, there's some really great DX clusters out there. Was a DX Summit, where you can take a look at where the activity is. I used it when I was very new to the hobby, and of course, I shouldn't say that because it wasn't that new itself. But when it first came online, I spent a lot of time, looking to see where different parts of the world were coming alive. What was happening in Europe, what was happening in South Africa. And then making sure that I could, be sitting on those frequencies, listening again, and working that DX, as I possibly could.
I got you. Now, is there any other tools, any other avenues that we can kind of, outside of maybe listening to our local repeaters where guys are talking back and forth if they're chasing DXs, are there other tools that we can use to find out where folks are at?
Well, again, there's a pretty good, my main tool, and certainly I use it extensively in contests, is DX packet clusters. In fact, I ran one for a number of years, probably 10 years myself. It was W1GQ.net, Telnet. And, it was just a way to, I provide or give back into the community. So I built it and put it on the air. But no, I think the DX Summit, these DX clusters are probably one of the best ways to find out what's going on in different parts of the world.
Do you have any good operating tips, any good ways that we can put in our back pocket so when we get on the air we can remember this for operating DX? Like if we're just kind of a casual guy, I get an hour and a half away from the family and I can go into the shack. Where's a good place for us to start?
Well, I think as far as starting in on the bands or starting
Well, we walk into our shack and we're like, I'd like to find some DX. Of course, we can go look at the cluster and see where folks are. But are there any ways that will help the odds, stack the odds in our favor at all?
Well, it depends on. I mean, I personally go in the shack at all times, day and night, and they all have their different challenges. So, but to be direct to your question, I think it's just the fun of DXing is just turning on the radio, tuning up and down the bands, and listening to what is taking place. I think the DX cluster is a good way to kind of hedge your bets. If you want to work a particular country, if there's a DXpedition, you can find out where they are and just immediately go to it. But the joy, and again, it comes back of harkening all the way back to when I was a child. Nothing like turning on the radio and just listening to what is happening on the band, seeing if Europe is open, Japan is open, who's working what. I get joy listening to others at different parts of the world and just seeing kind of what's happening on the bands. And then that will lead me to what I want to do. In other words, if I see Europe is open and, I want to work a couple of stations, I'll just put out a CQ and see what comes back. Or I'll listen for CQs and then respond to them.
A lot of guys, myself included, are general class licensees. And we look at the band plan from the ARRL and we're like, well, we get a little bit more here and a little bit more there. But tell us about what we're not experiencing by not having the extra class license to get that extra bit of the bands.
Well, there's activity on that extra bits of the bands, as you say. I certainly enjoy that full privilege of being an extra, but the DX, if you're a modest station and you're beginning, a general class is fine. But as you start to become more serious, going after some of these DXpeditions, like Boveda Island, as I mentioned, they may be sitting right there on the edge of the frequency or over in the extra or advanced band, and you're going to need that class of license to work them. If your desire is just to work some DX once in a while, the general's fine. If you want to start really chasing DX and going after those awards, you'll never know where they're going to be sitting, and you don't want to have to sit there and listen to them and can't work them. So that's just that's why I just think that full privilege. If you really want to go chasing DX and start doing the DXCC, it's important.
Real quick, this kind of backs into that. We know that CW is no longer required. It seems to me that there is a surge in people wanting to learn and people learning and getting on the bands with Morse code. Is that a trick to getting some of these getting into this DX contest? Is CW really where it's at?
Well, again, if you're working, as you said earlier, if there's 700,000 people calling on SSB, that's a mess.
Yeah.
If you go to certainly I have more DX countries on CW than I have voice because I like CW, but also it's a little bit easier, the sense that you're not going to have as much competition. So chasing DX in CW, certainly if there's a big pileup, you're going to have just a little bit of a better chance at it. The other thing too that's it's historical and for me personally, when I became a ham, the radios were so cruddy that CW was pretty much the only mode that would work for me. The first transmitter and receiver I had AM and CW, so SSB wasn't even a part of that radio. So CW is something that's kind of gotten in my blood. I am surprised that as CW was taken away as or no longer required to become a extra or to move or to become licensed, that it didn't it went up in popularity, not down, and that was a little bit of a surprise for me. I didn't think that would happen.
Well, one of the reasons I stayed away from the hobby, although I really wanted to participate, was the code. Then I got licensed after the code went away. And, of course, then I start a podcast, which takes all the extra time away. But, yeah, I would really love to learn Morse code, and I don't have to. So it's almost like a child, when you tell them they can't have something, and then you tell them they can. They're like, well, okay. It's almost like, I think it's just a psychology thing. By not being required or forced to do something, maybe folks are just like, hey, I'd like to learn that. I don't have to, but I'd like the challenge of it, and I appreciate what it can do.
Yeah, and it's a challenge. There's no doubt about it. You have to be very dedicated to learn it. And certainly these DX stations, and I can talk specifically about into Russia or some of the Baltic states. Most of those DX operators are really good CW operators because they were challenged by equipment that maybe wasn't as sophisticated or as good. And they sat on CW for years and years and became just a very proficient operator. So, working into different parts of the world, you'll find, and Japan's another area that just, CW operators in Japan, they're just wonderful. They're very talented CW operators.
Now, a few minutes ago, we were talking about working split, and we just barely tapped into that. But I know that's a big deal with a lot of DX. Can you give us a little rundown on what working split actually is?
Sure. So when you're a DX station, you want to make sure that your calling frequency as you're transmitting is quiet, so people can hear you. And so what most DX operators, certainly the DX expeditions, will listen up frequency 5 to 10. And the reason for that is to kind of spread out the crew, spread out the people who are calling them. And so most popular DX will have to do that. Again, I've been on the receiving side of that. When you have thousands of stations calling you on your frequency, it's just awful to try to hear through all of those stations because they're all, especially CW at times too, because they all, your ear is an instrument and it kind of follows music. Mm-hmm. So the tones, the way you hear DX in a contest or DX expedition is you hear it by tones. That's how you kind of parse out. The ear is just a wonderful thing. You can parse out the different stations by the tone of those stations. But when you have 1,000 or 2,000 simultaneously, those tones overlap, and you can't distinguish them. So what most DX expeditions will do, or DX stations, will just move people out. So you can have a clear calling frequency, and you can move people up and or out of the, or kind of spread them out a little bit, so you can kind of tune your VFO up and down and make sure that you can pull out a station efficiently.
And here on this end of working the DX, a lot of our rigs now have a split VFO or dual VFO so that we can work one frequency and listen on the other just like they're doing on the other end.
Absolutely. And most of the modern radios, I can't think of one that doesn't have that ability to work split. And, part of the problem there is, you've got to listen on your calling frequency to make sure that, that station or stations around you is semi-clear and clean. Listen to what I like to do if I'm working a DX station is listen to other people, make contacts with them. So as you're listening up, listen for that exchange, 599. And then that way you can sit there and go, okay, is that person, is the DX station moving that VFO up or VFO down? And kind of move yourself a little bit up or a little bit down in kind of anticipation of that DX station landing on top of you. And then call CW at the appropriate time.
It's, you've said it 100 times. Well, maybe not 100, but we've said it a lot today. Listening is so important. And that's a really big deal in this hobby. A lot of people think ham radio, it's all about talking, but it's really shortwave listening with the opportunity to talk if you'd like, whether you're talking with a paddle or, a key or whatnot. But you can't talk to someone if you're not listening to them.
Well, absolutely. And I hear this because I've observed over the decades of being a ham operator, different DX stations, and it's amazing how many people will call CQ or put their call in while the DX station is either working somebody else or calling somebody else, and so that's where that 700,000 you said earlier becomes just a mess. Listen. And it's the only tip that I could give that just worked years and years. And again, I've worked every station except North Korea, or every part of the world, I should say, except North Korea, by being very patient, listening, and working very efficiently.
Right. And that goes back to the code of conduct. I mean, we could have an entire program on just the DX code of conduct, but it is to wait till they're ready to get your call before you start sending your call. And I could soapbox that to death. From my little poor station here in the upstate of South Carolina, that has been one of the most frustrating things. Is just folks just aren't using common sense and manners, for lack of a better term.
Well, and also I think it has to do with frustration. And I think our hobby, as the radios become more sophisticated and as people spend more and more money on these radios, as they decide to, take the station from modest on up, they feel that it's going to just solve that problem. It doesn't. I don't care if you are a QRP station or you're running a Sirius stack Yagis and all that wonderful stuff. You still have to listen. You have to be courteous and not assume anything. But I hear the frustration on the bands. Certainly when the station becomes, or the station's rare and has been on for 10, 15 years, everybody wants that country. Mm-hmm. You can just feel the tension in the air. And there's where I think everybody just needs to take a deep breath and listen and be courteous if you can.
And remember, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, although I have to say, I'm probably guilty of a little bit of that excitement and a little overzealous myself. But I think after all the years, I kind of look back and boy, I think it can be fun. It should be fun if you're just going to take a deep breath and go after it in a careful way.
I got you. Now, you spoke earlier about some awards, and you guys, we've been talking about DXing. We've been talking about making the distant contact, the rare and even the not-so-rare contacts. But, I found that every one that I've made that's further than I think I should be able to talk DX or even within the states, I've been pretty tickled. Like you said, you get that little twinge in your belly, for lack of a better term. But tell me about some awards, because this isn't done it can be done just for fun, but there are a lot of people that chase paper, and paper being awards that you can receive from the different folks that provide those. Tell us a little bit about that before we let you go.
Sure. No, the number one for DX is DXCC by the ARRL. That seems to be kind of the gold standard. There are certainly other awards, either with CQ magazine and around the globe, but kind of the gold standard. And who does publish the list for countries that are recognized as countries for chasing DX is the ARRL DXCC. And then there's the Work All Continents, which is another ARRL award. That one's pretty straightforward though, because working every continent is it's a challenge, but it's not a deep challenge. Getting back to DXCC, certainly they have an authorized list of countries, and that's interesting to follow just because you kind of get a feel for what the different parts of the world are all about. And then it's also broken down by mode, so CW, certainly SSB, etc., and by bands. There's 5-band DXCC, so you have to work over 100 countries from all 5 bands. There's just various flavors of it, and all of it can be fun. I have a shack full of paper, and I look at it and kind of get a smile. It's kind of a cool thing.
Well, there's rewards in most every hobby. This is more than just a golf game or whatnot. I mean, that takes an investment of time. It takes an investment of income, and this is no different. It's a hobby with a reward. You get the reward of getting the hole-in-one in golf. You get the reward in amateur radio, making the contact, and then getting the paper to put on the wall for the contact.
Absolutely, but it's really a self-award. I mean, my wife will come into the shack and look at it, and she doesn't know what it means, and I can't really explain it to her, and I can't tell her why I'm really doing it. So it's really a self-award, which is kind of funny because although ARRL and CQ magazine they'll publish all the where you stand, where you rank, and such, but at the end of the day, it's really your self-award, and it's that pride that I've worked various countries, different bands, different modes, and again, I think it's one of those self-recognition things that you kind of get pride after,
right.
Or pride for.
Well, Bruce is a dedicated DXer, but we're going to talk to him again pretty soon. We're going to talk about contesting. He doesn't have 4 towers in his backyard just to make distant contacts because he's got buddies in Nepal. Bruce is working it pretty hard. So we'll be back before too long with Bruce, and we're going to continue that conversation. George, you're in here still with us. Anything out there that we might have forgotten that you thought Bruce needs to share with the group here before we let him go?
Boy, I think you guys really covered the terrain really, really well. I guess the only thing that sort of pops into my mind kind of gets back to the question of equipment. And certainly, Bruce, you could, as you said, you could work DX with a modest station or an elaborate station, but for the guy who's already got a typical, let's say, average quality kind of station like an ICOM 706 or the $1,000 kind of caliber radio. From a practical point of view, do you see that getting a fancier radio will really make much of a difference, or do you think that's just kind of unnecessary?
Ooh, that's a tough question, because I've taken the bait, right? I buy every
yes.
expensive radio I can find, and does it really make that much difference? Probably not. Again, it's all about listening and your skills more than it is about the radio. However, the modern radios, the ICOM 7800 or the Kenwoods, all of them have just wonderful noise canceling technology. As you said or asked earlier about split frequencies, both transmitted. They've got two wonderful receivers and a good transmitter. So I think, working DX is kind of a personal thing. In a modest station, you can have just nothing but a boatload of fun. I can tell you that when I was 13 with a Cruddy radio, I had just as much fun because I worked Japan from Palos Verdes that I do today when I turn on the radio, and I have some really high-end radios. I turn on the radio and I work into South Africa. I have that same golden feeling. And so, to your direct question, I think it's kind of cool to have the newest technology. I don't think it's needed. I think that fun can be whatever you have.
Should a man spend more on an antenna or more on a radio?
More on the antenna. I'm a big believer in antennas because, frankly, with a nice antenna and a Cruddy radio, you'll do pretty well. With a Cruddy antenna and a great radio, you won't do much. George and I had the privilege of being in Japan many years ago, and we went to a ham radio store, and they had a vertical antenna with a 50 ohm resistor at the bottom of it. So it's 1-to-1 Viswar, but it was basically you're transmitting into a resistor, which, as we all well know, will not do too good. So I'm a believer in antennas, but also I've optimized both, right? Then you get into the other kind of the off the reservation kind of conversations, which then you look at, okay, I need massive hard line to make sure that there's no loss to the antennas. It just goes on and on and on. That's where the money pit takes place.
Right. Well, man, we've really enjoyed having you, and we can't wait to have you back on again, and we'll continue the conversation, DX into contesting, because they really walk hand in hand together, and to do one well, you really need to understand the other. But, Bruce, we've enjoyed having you. We look forward to having you back again. His call is Whiskey 1 Golf Quebec. His name is Bruce Jewett, along with George Zaff. And I'm not going to say the rest of it because I'll say it wrong. But appreciate you both being on here with us. And we'll look forward to chatting with you again, Bruce. Thank you again. Thank you, George.
Great. Thank you for having me.
73s.
All right. So thank you, Bruce. Thank you, George. Appreciate you guys both being on here. In the show notes, we've got all the links of things we talk about there. You can find it at photimepodcast.com. photimepodcast.com. Bruce's call, Whiskey 1 Golf Quebec. Maybe you'll find him on the air and make a contact. Let him know you heard him here on the Photime Podcast. And Bruce is coming back in a few weeks. We're going to talk about contesting. So we're going to take what we've learned today about DXing and put it into practice with contesting. So make sure you come back for that one as well. We got a D-Star show that George and Jeremy are working on and some other things, so don't miss a program. And if you do, just subscribe to the program. You can do that on iTunes or any of your favorite listening services. Subscribe every time we release a show. It puts it in your mailbox. And if you're interested in becoming a patron of the show, check out our Patreon link. It's the Circle P down there at the bottom of the website. Join Donald Gover and others as they give to the show here to keep us going. Got a lot of great projects I'm going to be mentioning too as well regarding keeping the show going and adding to the shack and the recording capacity here at the Photime Ranch. So, guys, thank you so much for participating, for listening, for commenting, for just giving us a reason to continue making this show. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but we really enjoy being a part of your amateur radio hobby. We sincerely thank you and hope you come back next time. My name's Kel. We'll see you then. God bless you. 73, y'all.
Thanks for downloading, listening, and subscribing to AmateurRadio15.com presents Time, the other ham radio podcast. You can find our past episodes, web links, and more at AmateurRadio15.com. That's AmateurRadio15.com. Follow us on Twitter at Time Podcast. And remember to visit our show sponsor, Main Trading Company, at mtcradio.com. Till next time, 73s.